Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Marketplace. For you and your naturally special gifts, we of the Spirit of Tepereth, through our metaphysical market located at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, desire to provide you guidance and support through this, your life's journey. We provide tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, wall hangings, oils, crystals, and much more. We look forward to spiritual growth with you at the Spirit of Tepereth. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leader in charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, or the American Descendants of Controversial. The controversial group ADOS, the American Descendants of Controversial. The controversial group ADOS, the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American Descendants of Slavery, our friends and our allies. This is episode 3. I'm your host, Lisa Daud, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from the New York Times, Dr. John Bergman, D.C., the Mughaldom Nation. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we will dive into and interview the news report inside a Russian troll factory in Ghana. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
In today's personality piece, we would like to explore what is the undiscussed news, and what do we mean by that term, and what if something we share you've already heard. The goal of Articles of ADOS podcast is to not assume that you've never heard of an article that we will feature. We assume that you probably did hear it, and we also assume that somebody else may not have. So if you are one of those people that by chance every article in our podcast, you heard about it, you shared it, you discussed it, you are well informed. And not all of us are. We are so busy, we are so distracted that a lot of the information and a lot of the articles just aren't being discussed. In your opinion, what is undiscussed news? Because initially that wasn't our tagline. Our tagline was something totally different. You pointed out it's not really explaining what we're doing. So I came up with undiscussed news. What does that mean?
Well, I'd like to give an example that I think will hit the bullseye on the head. A number of years ago, a series, rather famous series of articles came out based out of Pennsylvania on the reality that, and I'll just describe it in a nutshell, how they were taking mass incarceration for adults and visiting the same mass incarceration mentality among adolescents by way of judges colluding with prison officials that operated juvenile residential or locked facilities. They found that a lot of these judges, high esteemed ordered judges, were having these agreements and basically bulldozing or pushing through a lot of young people into the system that really didn't need such stiff sentences in like 6 month to a year stays in facilities. Well, it made money. That was the incentive, and they discovered the kickbacks. Well, we started hearing about these, and even recently, some posts show those original articles that were done. All of them that I saw at the time, and I was working in the system, all of them that I saw at the time were pictured and stories centered around the experience of white adolescents. Even then, I did not know. I assumed, but didn't know, that, well, there's a lot more black children that we just are not hearing the series of, getting in the series that were being done. The reality was that now, almost 10 years past that big debacle, the vast majority of young people that were being bulldozed into those systems with those kickbacks to judges from those who operated those facilities, they were ADOS children. And that's the reality. A lot of the news is not necessarily undiscussed, but sometimes the character of how it impacts ADOS America is unaddressed and not acknowledged. So all too often, we don't know the severity of how we are impacted by what's going on all around us. A lot of the angst and anger at those judges that were doing that thing where they had a white mother confront him and scream at him as they're taking him off to jail. There should have been a black mother there. And there probably could have been a black mother there in the black community. And no, I didn't hear anything from the NAACP. I didn't hear anything from other civil rights groups arguing about it. It became the anger of these white mothers who were upset that these judges were doing it to their children. And that's because the news carried in such a way that centered the discussion on their experience. Yes, there were white children that were involved in it, but the vast majority were black youth. And I don't believe on the whole, we were aware about it. I know at the time it wasn't coming up. It was one of the parties I would go to. And a person at the party said, well, is that really happening to black kids? Because their mind was being shaped by what they were being exposed to. Mm-hmm. So that was undiscussed in the news. The black character of that debacle going on in Philadelphia, because they left us out purposely so that we could not form a ruckus. And that's done in a lot of things. It's done today. It is that you are so busy throughout the day, you do miss some things. And that way we may even run across those things they do miss. So in that sense, both are true. Things that they genuinely miss and things that are purposely hidden that they can't help but miss because they're not covered.
And another piece of that is that you're sharing the information. You click share, you click retweet, and that's it. And that's all you're getting. And that's good to some extent. But we want you to understand what you're sharing and what you're clicking on. Daud gives great commentary on the articles that he shares. You'll see and hear that in the show, and that's his strength. So, with that being said, we're ready.
Ashe. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally, or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org.
If you also need more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda, please visit ADOS101.com.
Today in Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed. All in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have...
For urban poor, the coronavirus complicates existing health risks. Tagline, an outbreak could devastate low-income Black and Latino communities that even in the best of times face serious medical challenges. It could exacerbate the vulnerabilities of resource-strapped minorities and cause devastating consequences. Not only would the disproportionately high rates of disease and illness among those populations make them particularly vulnerable if infected by the virus, but living in dense apartment buildings and using public transportation can also increase the risk of transmission. There is also the issue of distrust, especially among African Americans, of a medical system with a history of mistreating and exploiting them. Publication, The New York Times. Author, John Elligan. I give this article good. And up next we have...
From the publication, Dr. John Bergman, entitled, Why I Am Not Afraid of the Coronavirus. Tagline, Don't panic, be prepared. COVID-19 will spread around the world. This is a pandemic. Some people will die. Currently at a rate of 2%, vastly consisting of people with already compromised immune systems, consisting of the elderly, the chronically ill, and the young. 98% who get the virus will live. Panic will weaken immune system response. As of 2013, 1.7 million Americans developed hospital-acquired infections, and 99,000 Americans die of hospital-acquired infections annually. What can you do? 1. Don't panic. 2. Don't look for a new medical intervention. 3. Strengthen your immune system, consisting of dark fruits and vegetable consumption. Plenty of water. 4. Know that viruses are parasites that use host materials such as DNA, RNA, to replicate so they can get weaker as they transfer from patient to patient. 5. No matter how virulent the virus, people can recover. The world is in an economic crisis due to a lack of value-backed securities and currencies. The world governments have to control their populations during the worldwide depression by placing blame on the virus, where the scapegoat is a pandemic. This will cause people to willingly give up their rights for safety. Publication, Dr. John Bergman. Writer, Dr. John Bergman, D.C. chiropractor. Grade, good, for it gives us more information about the reasons for the spread of the virus, who it impacts, and how it's being overblown to cover America's financial difficulties. Up next we have
Title: Chris Hayes, Black voters can't join GOP because of structural white supremacy. White people in America have two parties to choose from, and between those two parties they sort in all kinds of ways, Hayes said, describing different white voter profiles but asserting that all types of Black Americans must join the Democratic Party because there's only one party they can be a part of because of the nature of structural white supremacy in America and the political coalitions. Hayes argued that this broader range of lives experienced among African American voters in the party should help more liberal Democrats understand why so many Black voters have chosen to vote for Joe Biden. Publication: The Washington Free Beacon. Author Paul Crookston. I give this article an okay. Up next we have
from the publication, page 6, entitled, Gayle King has moved on from Snoop Dogg beef. Gayle King has moved on from her showdown with Snoop Dogg. The rapper had called her a dog-haired word I prefer not to repeat. I just can't do it. After she brought up Kobe Bryant's rape allegations in an interview shortly after the Lakers star tragic death. What got to me was the vitriol and the vulgarity that was just unleashed at me in ways that I couldn't even understand. She told Oprah Winfrey at a stop on Winfrey's tour Saturday. Is there a scab? Yeah, but I have moved on. I've never lost sight of who I was and what I believe I am and my intention. This from page 6, writer Carlos Greer. I give this a score of not worth your time for the primary reasons that this was ultimately an engineered campaign to turn this problem into a beef between Black men and Black women. Sad but true. At the same time, what were the Black American public steered away from? Black journalists who compromised themselves by participating in a white domination racist media system that often displays Black men as beasts narratives to justify the double standards Black male image and Black people generally have in this society by ways of the media. And up next we have
curriculum based on New York Times widely wrong 1619 project would be educational malpractice. Quote, as a work of journalism, the New York Times 1619 project is highly problematic. Turning it into a school curriculum is a major educational malpractice. Last week, our Twisted History series featured a range of thinkers outlining the grave distortions. Named for the year African slaves were first brought to these shores, the 1619 Project holds that out of slavery grew nearly everything that has truly made America exceptional: its economic might, its industrial power, its electoral system. The American Revolution, in its telling, wasn't meant to enact a grand experiment in liberty, just the opposite. Project lead Nicole Hannah-Jones insists the revolution's main goal was to ensure the survival of slavery. Publication: The New York Post. This is an opinion article written by Post editorial board, and I give it a grade okay.
From the publication The Moguldom Nation, entitled 10 Things to Know About Gary Webb, the reporter who linked the CIA to crack cocaine. Number 1. Webb followed the crack supply chain. Crack was almost impossible to find in Los Angeles' Black neighborhoods before members of the CIA Army began supplying the cheap high in the 1980s, Webb found. Number 2. Impact of crack cocaine on black communities. While 25% of the crack users were black, African Americans accounted for 82% of convictions for crack possession. Number 3. Webb's Dark Alliance was the first investigative story to go viral. Number 4. Webb was unprepared for the uproar in black communities. Number 5. A 1989 Senate investigation showed the U.S. government knew about it. A special Senate subcommittee, chaired by then-Senator John Kerry, did an investigation in 1989. The report found considerable evidence that the Contras were linked to running drugs and guns, and that the U.S. government knew about it. Number 6. Webb's Dark Alliance forced the U.S. government into PR defense mode. Number 7. Mainstream media attacked Webb. The LA Times assigned 17 reporters to pick apart Webb's reporting. They denied trying to attack the Mercury News, but one staffer admitted there was a Get Gary Webb team. Number 8. A feature film vindicated Webb to some degree. Number 9. Webb's life after Dark Alliance. Webb resigned from the Mercury News. He published a book based on the Dark Alliance series in 1998 and did freelance investigative reporting afterwards. Number 10. Webb's death. At age 49, Webb committed suicide on December 10, 2004, with 2 .38 caliber bullets to his head. Author Dana Sanchez. Grade good. I wish it could have expounded on what he was also working on that may have played a role in his choice of suicide, but aside from that, this is a good read and understanding of a hero, Mr. Gary Webb. And that's it for today's Rapid News Reports. All articles will be shared in our Facebook group and in our show notes on our website.
Time now for the main event.
Thousands of miles from the frosty streets of St. Petersburg, this is a new hub for Russia's infamous trolls. A CNN investigation has found that Accra, Ghana was the launch pad for an online operation to stoke racial tensions and stir up social unrest in the U.S. ahead of the 2020 election. On Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, hundreds of accounts churned out posts about issues such as racism and police brutality in the U.S.
For months now, we've been investigating this network of trolls targeting African Americans, and now we've actually come here to Ghana to try to get the full story.
In today's main event, we will be interviewing the news report, Inside a Russian Troll Factory in Ghana. Tagline: working with researchers from Clemson University, CNN has found a Russian troll operation targeting American voters, and it's not where you might expect. In today's interview, Lisa will ask the questions, and I will give the answers.
So where did you find this Russian troll farm operation?
Accra, Ghana.
What would you say is the purpose of this Russian troll farm?
To stoke racial tensions and stir up social unrest ahead of the 2020 elections.
How so?
By using Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, making hundreds of accounts that churn out posts about issues such as racism and police brutality in the U.S. For months now, we've been investigating this network of trolls targeting African Americans.
Is it only African Americans who are targeted in order to stoke racial tensions? Allow me to clarify. Since Russia is attempting to stoke racial tensions in America, how is it that national media that you represent fail to identify Russian troll activities that target whites, white nationalists, who are, by the way, participating in white domination racist protests, and who have been committing acts of violence across this country for several years now? How is this missed by the media?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward has no response.
Okay, I'll move on then. What did your investigation discover in Ghana?
We discovered that the accounts were connected to an NGO called Eliminating Barriers for the Liberation of Africa, known as EBLA. Looking at their website, it was clear something was off.
In what way?
Well, parts of it still had dummy text. It was impossible to make an actual donation, and most mysteriously...
Oh, mysteriously.
Yes. One of the pictures on the site had a Russian file name.
Wait a minute. You knew going in that this was a Russian troll operation? How was finding a link in the form of a Russian file name mysterious? Is it possible that you were utilizing this wording in order to induce nefarious intentions in the minds of your viewers?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward has no response.
Please continue.
Though the group claimed to be interested in addressing things like poverty in Ghana, its employees posted almost exclusively about the U.S. Some used incendiary language. Often they posted on real U.S. groups, an attempt to gain legitimacy and build an audience. Many even implied they were in America by making references to anti-black violence they witnessed in black communities.
That is troubling. What has the Ghanaian government done to address this?
People told us that the Ghanaian authorities raided the location of the troll operation on the outskirts of Ghana's capital, and no one has been back since.
On what charges were the people that were found there arrested for?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward never indicates throughout her report the formal charges nor people arrested during the raid. She only repeats that the raid had taken place several more times throughout the rest of the broadcast.
Was there anything of significance found in this raid?
Ghanaian security forces found that all of EBLA's funding came from Russia. We also found that the tactics Russians were using in Ghana were strikingly similar to Russia's international research agency, known as the IRA, who had been engaging in such tactics just prior to the 2016 elections.
Well, this should not have been a surprise again, since you knew this was a Russian operation going in, right?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward has no response.
Well, about the 2016 elections, isn't it true that during the Congress and Mueller's investigations, only found that the Google ads purchased by the IRA was only $4,700, and that while they did spend $100,000 total on Facebook and Twitter, they had spent half, $50,000, prior to the election, spending the rest afterwards. So are you implying that the IRA spent only $54,700 and that this undermined the Hillary Clinton campaign, which spent over $1 billion? Really?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward does not respond.
Well, let's move on. What else in your investigation did you find?
A Mr. Amana, whose real name is Seth Uredu and who speaks Russian, is Ghanaian. Uredu has worked and studied in Russia for many years, but he denies working for a Russian troll operation.
Hold on just a moment. Earlier, your report indicated that the EBLA site participants talked about the poverty in Ghana. Is it any stretch of the imagination that Mr. Uredu has found a way to get paid and employ fellow Ghanaians in a developing country still struggling to survive poverty, while neocolonialism continues to negatively impact his country? Is that possible?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward does not respond.
Okay, Ms. Ward, can you provide an answer to this question? In all of the reporting on Russian troll farms stoking racial unrest in the U.S., have you and your Clemson University team uncovered in any quantifiable way that such operations have played a direct role in initiating political activism, played a role in blacks not voting in 2016 elections, or fomented anti-white violence by African Americans? Can the IRA be blamed or directly tied to such activities?
Broadcast reporter Clarissa Ward does not respond.
I guess this interview is done.
News reported by CNN. News reporter Clarissa Ward.
Listeners, you can watch this full news report on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on what was alleged in this news report. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned. Liking the show so far? One of the best ways to support this show is to leave us a rating on iTunes. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you, and we thank you for your support, and we thank you for clicking that subscribe button. You're family now, so come on in and make yourself at home. So this report is interesting. She left out a lot of information. There are answers we couldn't get because the information wasn't there in the report. And I believe that was intentional.
I totally agree. And it's part and parcel of such reporting in the past, even stemming before the 2016 elections, where they found out that Russia was accessing and advertising through both trolls and clickbait farms, I should emphasize, were also active prior to the 2016 presidential elections. The reality is, though, that they were part and parcel of other operations that were going on at the time of regular people, regular businesses from around the world trying to gain access to the American market. And that should be also emphasized.
I remember that during that time. And of course, African Americans, ADOS, were blamed for Trump being elected. Most of the gatekeepers, most of the black journalists on our news media, all were stoking this notion that Russians are the reasons why black people voted the way that they did, as opposed to any one of us just walking out our door, seeing what our neighborhoods look like, seeing the police brutality that was happening at the time, seeing our wealth just evaporate. That couldn't possibly have anything to do with how we voted.
Exactly. And it's also reminiscent of what happened in the 2000 elections that black people were also blamed for. There's a consistent pattern of this blame game for blacks. And ultimately, when serious things are found among the white community or white institutions, people just complain then about there being a blame game. What we're seeing here is, again, another rendition of the blame Russia for black angst in America. Again, it took place as far back as Marcus Garvey, all the way through the Civil Rights Movement. But what we don't get are actual displays of interviews of those blacks who, in this case, some of which chose not to vote. Well, a few did. One report came out of the Washington Post, where they did interview blacks at a black barbershop in Milwaukee, a place where Hillary Clinton's campaign chose not to try to gather votes. And they said implicitly that Ms. Clinton proclaimed her desire for there to be a third Obama administration presidency. Well, by that time, many black Americans were disenchanted and disgusted at the inactive, poor performance Barack Obama had on the black community. So for Ms. Clinton to declare her desire for there to be an even third term, Obama term, this rubbed black Americans the wrong way. They couldn't vote for Trump, but they could not vote for her. So they chose not to vote. And not enough of that word got out. But what word did get out? These evil, dastardly, and mysteriously Russian trolls going out stoking racial unrest among the black community.
Yeah, and I remember I was a part of one of those groups. It was just, you hit the like button on a group and you're a part of it. That means what exactly? I never saw a post. I never saw a meme. I was never a part of any group that swayed my vote in 2016. And I'm going to propose that most decided one way or the other, whether they voted or whoever they did end up voting for, that it was their own decision. There was no influence. There was attempted influence, but we have our own minds and we have our own way of voting. And for the most part, 90% of us still voted for Democrats, and we still got blamed for Trump being elected.
Exactly. This is a ploy, really, to convince white America why black people are so disgusted about our society. That's what it's aimed for. Or they'd have a black reporter doing it. So they really don't care about, in my opinion, the black community. What this is a propaganda piece for white America to have this attitude towards black America. Here we go again. If things don't go the way whites who don't want Trump in, if it doesn't go that way, then if Trump is reelected, well, then there's another reason to blame it on blacks because of Russian meddling.
In her attempt to pre-blame, in a sense.
Yeah.
She failed. And how would you grade this report?
I think absolutely be exposed to it. I'd say fair then. Be exposed to it but realize that you have to discern what the intentions are, because it does leave so many critical things out, particularly the questions we asked that she could not respond to. And across the board, every report on this matter doesn't identify those critical questions. What quantifiable evidence can you show how Russian trolls had an impact on black behavior on any major scale that would have affected the outcome of elections? How and why can you push the narrative that 54 $700 was able to tip billion-dollar scales of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Notice those questions are never asked or ventured in such reports because they know that such reporting would fall flat on its face.
And I would also like to say that if the Russians influenced us, how is it that 90% of us still voted for Democrats? I'm sure the Roland Martins of the world will say it's not who voted, it's who didn't vote, right? So less people voted for Democrats. Well, that includes our white counterparts.
Exactly. Millions of Americans, period, are not voting and haven't been voting for the last 20 or 30 years because of this zero-sum game choice that people are being forced into, voting for the lesser of two evils. The reality is it's always been two evils that people have to vote for. So you go for the lesser, then that begins to have an impact where people don't feel that their vote really matters and why participate in something that's evil. So people are refusing to. Millions of white Americans are not. Millions of black Americans are not. Not because of any Russian troll interference, but because of the corrupt economic and political systems this country forces us into. Also, the concept, have to go into another area, also the concept of what is middle of the road or moderate political stances. It's absolutely been obscured when any, and this is history, when any political system is able to drive its citizenry in a democracy toward deciding on lesser than evil choices, eventually the dynamic gravitates towards those powerful interests. So what is considered moderate is really, in this stage, moderate at the least, but most likely conservative or Republican in nature. So what did Barack Obama state when he was cornered on this very issue towards the end of his presidency? He admitted, he identified himself that if he were to be judged on 1980s standards, and that's how it's this zero-sum game, choices between two evils has been seriously starting since the 1980s. He said himself that his policies would be judged as moderate Republican. And so most black people don't know in voting for Obama, they were voting for a moderate Republican because the idea of what is center politics in society has been shifting more to benefit and the interest of elites in the society who are ultimately conservative, who are ultimately anti-black and anti-black interest, and who are ultimately designing the system in a way that benefits them, which makes them by default conservative. And that's the landscape that we're in right now. So every time you hear about this discussion with Bernie Sanders being too far left, they're lying to you, in my humble opinion. Bernie is actually a slightly left of center political person in terms of the grand scheme of things and how things have drifted in the favor of elites in the society.
That's it for this week's main event. All links and articles will be listed in our show notes and in our Facebook group. In today's Say a Word segment, Michael Dawson lays out what he saw as the future of black politics in this University of Chicago interview dated October 26, 2011. Take a listen and see if you can catch the difference in his views in ADOS then and now.
The name of the book is None in Our Lifetimes, The Future of Black Politics. I wrote it because of the two most shocking events in recent modern African-American politics. The aftermath of the Katrina disaster in New Orleans in 2005 and the election of the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama, in the fall of 2008, almost exactly 3 years later. Both of those two events represent, in many people's mind, both the low and highs of race and politics in the United States. I wrote the book to investigate what has changed and what has not changed about racial politics and racial dynamics in our country. Not as much changed as we would hope. On one hand, the divide, particularly between African American and white Americans on political attitudes, racial attitudes, evaluation of political candidates is just huge. It just gulfs any other divide in American politics. Whether we're talking about support for reparations for slavery, whether we're talking about evaluation of President Bush or President Obama, whether we're talking about decisions to go to war, we're talking about totally different worldviews on how white and black Americans see politics within the United States. One of the disturbing trends in black politics, and which was really demonstrated effectively after the Katrina disaster is the inability to either at the local level, but particularly at the national level, to mobilize in ways that have been familiar to African American institutions. The civil rights organizations, the Black Power organizations are either non-existent or much weaker in their ability to mobilize. Even organizations that had nationwide networks like the Nation of Islam no longer can mobilize to the same degree that they were able to, for example, for the Million Man March in the 1990s. What has to be redone is to rebuild independent Black organizations, particularly Black political organizations. Independent Black organizations need to be rebuilt like they were in the early part of the 20th century. When African Americans are mobilized, it tends to balance the political debate in the United States as a whole. African Americans are the most liberal group in the United States, more liberal than Jewish Americans, more liberal than most Democrats are for that matter. So at this time that you have an active right-wing conservative movement, and mobilized African American movement would mean that within the United States, we would also have a mobilized, more liberal, more left-leaning movement as well. You would have a more balanced, more nuanced, more competitive politics than we have at this point. What we have in the United States at this point, particularly in Black communities, is a fair amount of pessimism, a fair amount of despair, a fair amount of anger that is unorganized and therefore cannot be channeled in an effective political manner as we saw half a century ago. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the political potential of young African Americans and young Americans in general. First of all, they haven't learned that what's not possible yet. And I think whether it's for my generation, we didn't know what was possible in the 1960s or 1970s, and consequently were able to affect a lot of change that our elder brethren said was impossible. Secondly, though, and I think I find this particularly interesting given my own personal interest in technology and the use of technology in politics and society more generally, is that there's so many new tools, whether we're talking about social media, the use of throughout the world of Facebook, Twitter, smartphones as extraordinary instruments of political mobilization, political organization, of protest, as well as in some cases of authoritarian repression as well, is that we're entering a period where technology is a more integral part of the political process than ever, and as young people understand that technology better than anyone else.
There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss.
If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. So until next time, peace, fam.